Right now, I do want to get to the latest on Operation Epic Fury. Take a look right here at this post from Phil Stewart with Reuters. We have now learned that Pakistan's capital of Islamabad has been locked down ahead of those peace talks between the U.S. and Iran. He posted this right here saying Pakistani authorities have locked down the capital Islamabad in anticipation of the war's first peace talks, cutting off all access to a 2-mile zone around the 5-star luxury Serena Hotel. Both the U.S. and Iranian delegations are expected to stay at the hotel, which told all guests to check out until Sunday, as it had been requisitioned for an important event. The White House saying Vice President J.D. Vance will travel to Pakistan along with the U.S. delegation, which includes Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Officials in Pakistan say the talks could actually begin tomorrow, though it appears more likely that they would take place on Saturday. All of that right now in flux. And reports are also indicating that the Strait of Hormuz remains virtually closed today, with maritime intelligence firm Lloyd's List Intelligence saying that only 3 vessels were allowed through on Wednesday, and that was the first day of the ceasefire. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt had this to say Wednesday when asked about reports that the strait was closed. Take a listen. All right, unfortunately, it seems as though that audio is not working, but essentially she said her understanding is that the strait is open here, and essentially that reports that say it's closed are incorrect. If we get that soundbite for you, we'll make sure to bring it to you, but essentially that is what she had to say as she was asked about all of that. Right now, popping this up on your screen right here to give you a look at this post from the Associated Press, as we know that Leavitt and Israel have reiterated that attacks on the Hezbollah terror group in Lebanon are not part of the ceasefire deal with Iran. Israel has continued to conduct its strikes on the Iran-backed group in Beirut, but Iran's parliament speaker issuing a threat today on social media saying that continued Israeli attacks on Hezbollah would bring, quote, explicit costs and strong responses. Speaker Mohammed Bagher Qualibaf posting on X 3 bullet points, essentially saying there, ceasefire violations carry explicit costs and strong responses. Extinguish the fire immediately. As always, there is so much to discuss here, so I want to bring in Jonathan Ruhe, JINSA's Fellow for American Strategy. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and to help break it all down.
Thank you so much. Always my pleasure.
And first off, I want to talk to you a little bit about that post there from the Iranian parliament speaker talking about essentially the situation with Beirut and saying that something needs to be done there. We know, of course, we've heard from President Trump, we've heard from Caroline Leavitt, Israeli officials, that as of right now, Beirut is not part of this peace deal. So do you see anything happening here where that changes?
So I think that may be one of the many sticking points or points of contention that could be taking place in the discussions in Pakistan. I think it reflects a larger underlying development, which is, I would say, similar to the ceasefire in Gaza that President Trump achieved last fall. His MO is usually to get the ceasefire in place and then save all of the details for later, which then puts a greater burden on tough negotiations to follow in the second phase. And so I think right now, Iran, wants to, well, first of all, they think they won the war. They think this ceasefire is an admission of U.S. defeat. And so they're going to do everything they can to try to press that advantage. And one of those, or perceived advantage, and one of those fronts for Iran is indeed Lebanon, because from Iran's perspective, they worry that if Lebanon is the only front that Israel is dealing with, then indeed Israel will be able to significantly degrade Hezbollah when it's 100% focused on that.
And what we're looking at is a live look over there in Beirut. We know that the strikes by Israel, they have continued. As I mentioned, President Trump, Caroline Leavitt, the Israeli leaders there have said that Beirut is not part of this and that the strikes there on the Iran-backed Hezbollah terror group can continue. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other topics that I was discussing here off the top, and a big one is about the Strait of Hormuz. Do we have any idea at this point if the strait is really open, if it's closed? Because it seems that there's a lot of conflicting information coming from just about everyone.
Yeah, and I think the way you phrased it is perfect. It's both open and closed depending on who you ask. The Iranians will say it's open as long as you're willing to pay a toll to Iran and acknowledge Iran's self-proclaimed right to control the strait, which does not hold up under any even basic legal scrutiny. But if you're a shipping company, and as you mentioned, to hear about Lloyd's of London is a ship insurer. If you're a shipping company, clearly the perceived risks and costs of trying to act as if the strait is open, to transit it, to get those shipments back out into global shipping lanes. I mean, they're voting with their ships and in not moving. So it's, as long as there's the continued perception either that Iran's going to resume attacking ships that go through the strait at any minute, or even currently where they're going to, basically extort those ships for a very expensive form of passage. I mean, either way, effectively, the strait remains closed, and for Iran, that remains a major bargaining chip.
What about Vice President J.D. Vance being a part of these talks that are taking place over in Islamabad? As I mentioned off the top as well, Pakistan has essentially shut down Islamabad right now, saying that guests of the hotel where the delegation is expected to stay, they have been told to check out until Sunday due to a very important event. Having the vice president travel and be a part of this delegation and the talks, what does that say about the significance overall, but also the seriousness of how the U.S. is taking this?
Yeah, I think inserting the vice president into this process, both given his stature as the number two in the administration, but also the fact that he has not been involved in previous talks with Iran, I think is meant to accomplish several things. One, as you mentioned, to signal the sort of importance that the Trump administration is putting on this, and that to send the vice president presumably speaks with the authority of President Trump himself to try to press the Iranians to agree to Trump's proposal to get a longer term ceasefire. I think that's one aspect. A second aspect is that two previous rounds of discussions between the Trump administration and the Iranians were led by Trump's, basically envoy for all major conflicts, Steve Witkoff. The Iranians have made clear, I think rather unjustifiably, that they do not trust Steve Witkoff because those two previous rounds of talks led to military action, both last summer and now. But I think also, maybe trying to read in between the lines of what Trump is thinking, that those negotiations, I think Trump was dissatisfied with how they went. And so he wants to send a stronger message by having Vance go to lead the delegation.
And of course, you're looking at that post again from Reuters. Specifically, that is Phil Stewart, who says Pakistani authorities have locked down the capital Islamabad in anticipation of the war's first peace talks, cutting off all access to a 2-mile zone around that 5-star luxury hotel. Both the U.S. and Iranian delegations are expected to stay at the hotel, which told all guests to check out until Sunday, as it had been requisitioned for an important event. So not specifically saying that's what it's for, but of course, folks there in the area confirming that is the case. That is the hotel where both are likely to be staying. As we see the talks progress, we know that there's been discussion from different Iranian officials as they've essentially said that a big part of this is going to be their right to continue to enrich uranium. Is there any world where President Trump and the U.S. say, all right, we'll allow you to do that?
So I don't believe there's a world where we formally or even informally acknowledge that self-proclaimed right to enrich. No such right exists in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran uses as the basis for that claim. And to allow Iran to basically have that claim enshrined or recognized would cause a tidal wave of proliferation and undermine what's been a very successful treaty for decades. At the same time, if you look back at previous talks we've had with the Iranians under President Trump, but even going back to Biden and Obama, there's sort of a fudge, if you will, which is to not recognize that right, but to consider giving Iran some ability to retain enrichment capacity on its own soil. I have not seen that entirely forsworn. I have seen nothing that says that we, the United States, will absolutely refuse to Iran to allow any enrichment. I think the main focus, understandably, right now has been on that stockpile of highly enriched uranium that is buried under a lot of the sites that were hit last summer, and some of them again right now. I think that's certainly the most urgent focus. I understand that. But over the longer term, as long as Iran retains some indigenous enrichment capability, it's hard to imagine having some durable agreement with such a regime.
Going into this all just a little bit further, what you were just discussing there, what are you going to be watching for as these talks play out? No question, we don't have cameras inside, but I can imagine we're going to hear from Vice President Vance while he's there in Pakistan, also likely to get those live images coming in. What are you specifically going to be watching for?
So I think the main thing to look for is Iran's posture. And are they willing to actually give any ground on what they are claiming are their 10 points that were accepted in the ceasefire? Those 10 points add up to a U.S. admission of defeat. Iran is basically claiming victory. Those 10 points are nowhere near anything like a compromise you'd need to get out of this war with anything that remotely protects U.S. interests. So I will be very curious to see the American reaction coming out of those talks to how Iran is behaving. Are they trying to use these ceasefire talks as a way to get to some longer-term agreement that addresses a lot of the U.S. and Israeli concerns that led to this war? Or is Iran basically using the talks to try to browbeat and coerce the United States into essentially admitting defeat? Because Iran's list of demands, Hormuz is obviously one of them we discussed, Lebanon is another. Iran wants the United States out of the Middle East. They want something like an agreement that basically completely remakes the Middle East to the detriment of American interests.
Do you see this leading to anything? Could we potentially have more talks that follow? Is that kind of all up in the air?
It's certainly all up in the air right now. I mean, we're about 48 hours in, and this, as we mentioned at the outset, this ceasefire came about rather quickly and abruptly, and even since then we've seen there's still been exchanges of fire in the Gulf, not just in Lebanon. So everything is very much in flux. I think the key thing to look for now is what's America's sense of patience with Iran in these talks? Do they feel like the Iranians are going to try to use this pause not only to grandstand and basically advertise their victory, as we discussed, but also to try to rebuild, take advantage of the pause? Because from the Iranian perspective, initially they were hesitant to anything like a ceasefire because they thought they're winning, and they assumed the United States would use a ceasefire to rebuild and come back and attack again. So, for the United States, are we going to confirm Iran's suspicions? Or are we going to basically, Trump has said our forces are going to remain in the region. That's a very important thing. Do the Iranians believe that? Will they keep trying to press their advantage? Or will they actually believe the United States is willing to resume operations if the Iranians do what they've always done in the past, which is drag their feet and refuse to agree to anything?
Jonathan Ruhe there at JINSA, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and helping to break it all down. Anything we missed? Anything you want to make sure to add here before I let you go?
I would just sort of foot stomp a larger point, which is how this war actually ends will have ramifications far beyond just the immediate near term, the next headline. If Iran really does think they won this war, and if the negotiations do nothing to disabuse Iran or the region or the world of that, the United States could be facing very serious consequences over the long term in the region, in our partnerships with our Gulf allies, but also more broadly. China and Russia will take lessons away from a supposed Iranian victory and Iran's ability to influence the global economy. And I would just say, moreover, President Trump's outline for going to this, beginning this war in late February, was very clear and admirable, also ambitious. End Iran's nuclear and military capabilities, and create the possibility for the regime to collapse and be replaced by something that reflects the will of the Iranian people. That should still be the abiding goal, even if regardless of how these specific talks for the ceasefire shake out.
And of course, we'll be watching it very closely to see exactly how this plays out. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.